Get out. Professor Victoria Blackwood's voice sliced through the lecture hall like a blade. Her finger stabbed toward the door, pointing at the man in the maintenance uniform who had dared to stop mopping and stare at her blackboard. Don't pretend you understand this, janitor. 200 graduate students watched. Some smirked. Others looked away embarrassed by the cruelty they were witnessing. But the janitor didn't leave. Instead, Marcus Green set down his mop, walked toward the blackboard covered in complex equations, and said 7 words that would change both their lives forever. Professor, your 4th line is wrong. What happens when the person you humiliate knows more than you do? Comment below which city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The chalk snapped in Victoria Blackwood's hand. For 3 seconds, nobody in Preston University's largest lecture hall breathed. The sound of that broken chalk hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Excuse me. Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. What did you just say? Marcus Green stood 5 feet from the blackboard, close enough to smell the chalk dust, close enough to see the fury building behind the professor's designer glasses. He was still holding the mop handle, his maintenance uniform faded from years of washing, his work boots scuffed and worn. He looked nothing like someone who belonged in this room. Your 4th line. Marcus repeated, his voice calm and steady. The partial derivative. You dropped a negative sign when you applied the chain rule. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere in the back rows, then another. Within seconds, the entire lecture hall rippled with the kind of laughter that comes from watching someone walk into a trap of their own making. Victoria's face flushed red. Not from embarrassment. Victoria Blackwood hadn't felt embarrassment since her undergraduate days at Harvard. No, this was pure, undiluted rage. Do you have any idea who I am? She stepped closer to Marcus, her heels clicking against the polished floor. I am the head of this university's mathematics department. I have a PhD from Harvard, a postdoctoral fellowship from Cambridge, and 17 published papers in peer-reviewed journals. I have lectured at Oxford, presented at the International Congress of Mathematicians, and consulted for NASA. She paused, letting each credential land like a slap. And you, she continued, her lip curling with disgust, are a janitor. You push a mop. You empty trash cans. You clean toilets. What possible qualification do you have to critique my mathematics? The laughter in the room had died. Now there was only uncomfortable silence as 200 students watched their professor eviscerate a maintenance worker in real time. Marcus didn't flinch. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the blackboard, tracing the elegant symbols that covered it from edge to edge. Ma'am, with respect, the math doesn't care about my qualifications. It doesn't care about yours either. 2 + 2 = 4, whether a janitor says it or a Harvard professor. He pointed at the 4th line of equations. And that negative sign is missing whether you like it or not. Victoria's hand trembled, whether from rage or something else she couldn't tell. She turned to face the blackboard, her eyes scanning the equations she had written just minutes ago. Her heart stopped. The negative sign was missing. She had made an elementary error, the kind of mistake a first-year calculus student would make in front of 200 graduate students. And a janitor had caught it. Get out, Victoria whispered. Professor. I said get out. Her scream echoed off the marble walls. Get out of my lecture hall before I have campus security drag you out, and don't ever set foot in this building during my classes again. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not hurt, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like pity. Then he picked up his mop and his bucket and walked toward the exit. Just before he reached the door, he paused. Without turning around, he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. The error propagates through your entire proof, Professor. Lines 7 through 12 are all wrong now. You might want to fix that before you continue. The door clicked shut behind him. Victoria stood frozen at the front of the room. Her chest heaving, her carefully constructed world cracking around her like ice on a spring pond. She didn't look at her students. She couldn't. because when her eyes traced through lines 7 through 12, she found exactly what the janitor had predicted. Every single line was wrong. Victoria Blackwood had built her entire identity on being the smartest person in any room she entered. Growing up in Boston's Beacon Hill, she had been surrounded by excellence from birth. Her father was a federal judge. Her mother was a neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General. Dinner conversations revolved around case law and medical journals, and young Victoria learned early that intelligence was the only currency that mattered. She graduated valedictorian from Phillips Exeter Academy at 16. Harvard accepted her at 17. By 22, she had completed her PhD in pure mathematics and was already publishing papers that senior professors struggled to understand. Now, at 36, she stood at the pinnacle of academic achievement. Department head at Preston University, regular consultant for tech companies and government agencies, a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured lawns, where students in expensive clothes debated theories over $7 lattes. Her walls displayed certificates like trophies: Harvard, Cambridge, MIT. Each one a reminder that Victoria Blackwood had earned her place among the intellectual elite through brilliance, dedication, and uncompromising standards. She had never questioned this natural order. Intelligence followed predictable patterns. It required proper breeding, expensive education, and the right social connections. People who possessed true mathematical genius attended the right schools, published in the right journals, and moved in the right circles. People who pushed mops for a living simply weren't part of that world. They couldn't be. The afternoon of the incident, Victoria sat in her office, staring at the corrected equations she had spent 45 minutes reworking after the janitor left. Every fix had been necessary. Every line he mentioned had contained errors cascading from her initial mistake. How had he seen it so quickly? She had spent 20 minutes on that proof. 200 graduate students had watched her write it. Not one of them had spotted the error. But a janitor had, in seconds. Lucky guess, she told herself. He must have overheard students discussing similar problems. Maybe someone helped him identify the mistake beforehand as some kind of prank. That had to be the explanation. The alternative was unthinkable. Her phone buzzed. Jonathan Webb's name appeared on the screen, her boyfriend of 3 years, a mathematics professor at Harvard, who came from old money and older pedigree. "Catherine, darling?" His voice dripped with the kind of casual superiority that Victoria usually found charming. "I heard about your little incident today. Word travels fast in academic circles." Victoria's jaw tightened. It was nothing. A janitor thought he could play mathematician. "I handled it." "I certainly hope so. You can't let the help think they can challenge you publicly. It undermines the entire institution." Jonathan chuckled. "Can you imagine a janitor critiquing your mathematics? What's next? The groundskeeper editing your published papers." "He got lucky," Victoria said, but the words tasted hollow in her mouth. "One error doesn't mean anything." "Of course not, darling. Everyone knows real mathematical sophistication requires systematic training. Enthusiasm and lucky guesses don't replace years of rigorous education." Jonathan paused. "Anyway, I'm flying in Thursday for the Euler's Challenge announcement. Should be quite the show. Harvard is sending 3 candidates this year, all from my department. I'll see you then." Victoria ended the call and turned her chair to face the window. Outside, the sun was setting over Preston's historic campus, painting the Gothic architecture in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, a janitor was pushing a mop through empty hallways, probably thinking about what had happened today. Victoria found herself wondering something that disturbed her deeply. What else did he know? Marcus Green had been invisible for 5 years. That's how long he'd worked at Preston University, pushing his cleaning cart through academic buildings after sunset. His shift ran from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., covering 3 separate facilities. Empty trash cans, mop floors, clean windows, restock supplies. 6 nights a week, 50 weeks a year. Nobody saw him. Students walked past without making eye contact. Professors looked through him like he was part of the furniture. Security guards occasionally questioned his presence, requiring him to show his ID badge again and again, as if they couldn't quite believe someone like him had legitimate reasons to be in academic spaces. He had learned to accept the invisibility. It made certain things easier, like studying. Every night during his breaks, Marcus pulled textbooks from the bottom shelf of his cleaning cart, advanced mathematics hidden behind maintenance manuals and cleaning supply catalogs. He read by flashlight in empty lecture halls, filling coffee-stained notebooks with proofs and equations that would have impressed any graduate program in the country. Tonight, after what had happened with Professor Blackwood, Marcus sat alone in a basement storage room, surrounded by industrial cleaning supplies and fluorescent lighting, reading a graduate-level text on differential equations. His phone buzzed. His mother's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Mama." He smiled despite himself. Her voice always made him smile. "Marcus, baby, you sound tired. You're not pushing yourself too hard." "I'm fine, Mama. How are you feeling today?" "Oh, good days and bad days. The new medication makes me nauseous, but Dr. Patterson says that's normal." She paused. "Mrs. Williams from the church brought over a casserole. Can you believe it? Third one this month? I told her we're doing fine, but she won't listen." Marcus's jaw tightened. Fine. They weren't fine. His mother's medical bills sat in a stack on their kitchen table, growing taller every month. Cancer treatment wasn't cheap even with insurance, especially with insurance. He worked 3 jobs to keep up with the payments. Janitor at Preston from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Delivery driver from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. Weekend tutor for high school students struggling with calculus. Every dollar went to keeping his mother alive and the collectors at bay. "You don't have to work so hard, baby," his mother said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "I know I'm a burden." "Don't." Marcus's voice sharpened. "Don't ever say that. You're not a burden. You're my mother, and I'm going to take care of you no matter what." "I just wish you had finished your degree. You were so close, Marcus. So close to everything you wanted." The words landed like a punch to the gut. 7 years ago, Marcus had been 1 semester away from completing his PhD at MIT. His dissertation was nearly finished. His advisor, Dr. Eleanor Chen, had already lined up postdoctoral positions for him at 3 different universities. Everyone agreed he was destined for greatness. Then his mother got sick. Stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive, requiring immediate intensive treatment. His father had died when Marcus was 12. No siblings, no family with resources to help. Just Marcus and his mother against the world. He withdrew from MIT 3 weeks before his dissertation defense. There was no other choice. His mother needed him. The bills needed paying. Dreams of academic glory would have to wait. They were still waiting. "I know, Mama," Marcus said quietly. "But that chapter's closed now. I'm just a janitor." "You're never just anything, Marcus Green. Your brain doesn't stop working because you push a mop." His mother's voice turned sharp with pride. "What happened today at that university? Something's bothering you. I can hear it." Marcus laughed despite himself. She always could read him like a book. "Just had a run-in with a professor. She didn't appreciate some feedback I gave her." "Feedback?" His mother's tone carried a knowing smile. "Marcus, what did you do?" "I corrected a mistake she made, in front of her class." "Oh, baby." His mother sighed. "You can't help yourself, can you? See an error, got to fix it, just like your father." Marcus's father had been a high school math teacher in Baltimore, made $32,000 a year, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, wore the same sports coat every day for 15 years. But when he stood at his chalkboard explaining calculus to teenagers who thought they'd never use math in real life, he transformed into something magical. Marcus remembered watching his father light up room after room with the beauty of numbers. Remembered the former students who came to his funeral crying as they talked about how Mr. Green had changed their lives. His father had been brilliant, not Harvard. Brilliant, Not Cambridge brilliant, but genuinely deeply brilliant in ways that mattered. He saw mathematics as poetry, as music, as the underlying language of reality itself. And he passed every bit of that vision to his son. "I should have kept my mouth shut," Marcus said. "She's the department head. I'm the guy who mops her floors, probably going to get me fired." "If they fire you for being right, then they don't deserve you." "Mama, I need this job. I need all my jobs. Your treatment will work itself out," she interrupted firmly. "The Lord didn't give you that mind just to waste it pushing mops, Marcus. Something's going to change. I can feel it." Marcus wished he shared her faith. After hanging up, he returned to his textbook. But the equations blurred together. His thoughts kept drifting back to Professor Blackwood, the way she'd looked at him, like he was dirt, like he was something less than human. He'd seen that look before, from students who moved their bags when he entered study areas, treating him like a potential threat, from faculty members whose conversations halted whenever he approached, as if the presence of a janitor might contaminate their intellectual discussions. 5 years of invisibility had taught Marcus to ignore those looks, to focus on his work, do his job, and save every spare moment for the mathematics he loved. But today was different. Today, Professor Victoria Blackwood had humiliated him in front of 200 people, had screamed at him like he was an animal, had treated his correction, his accurate, helpful correction, like an act of war. And something inside Marcus shifted. He didn't want to be invisible anymore. 3 days later, Victoria stood at the podium in Preston's main auditorium, announcing the annual Euler's Challenge. Every seat was filled. 600 students, faculty members, and academic observers packed the room, drawn by the prestige of the competition and the weight of Victoria's reputation. The Euler's Challenge represents mathematical excellence in its purest form. Victoria declared, her voice carrying with practiced authority. $50,000 in prize money. Automatic PhD admission to any participating university. This is not a competition for amateurs or enthusiasts. This is a proving ground for the mathematically elite. Her eyes swept the auditorium, landing briefly on faces she recognized. Derek Chen from Harvard. Sarah Mitchell, her own star student. Alex Thompson from Yale. The usual suspects from the usual places. "Registration opens this afternoon," Victoria continued. "Qualifying rounds begin next week. I want to emphasize that this competition requires years of formal mathematical training, sophisticated techniques, graduate-level expertise. Candidates who lack these foundations would be wise not to waste everyone's time." A hand went up in the front row. Derek Chen, looking smug in his Harvard sweater. "Professor Blackwood, can anyone employed by the university enter the competition? I mean, technically speaking." Victoria's smile tightened. She knew exactly what he was asking about. The janitor incident had become campus gossip within hours of it happening. "Technically, yes. But as I said, advanced mathematics requires years of rigorous training. Without that foundation, any attempt would be—" She paused for effect. "Embarrassing." Scattered laughter rippled through the audience. "In fact," Victoria continued, moving toward the blackboard with theatrical confidence, "let me demonstrate the level of sophistication we expect." She wrote a calculus integration problem, one that looked deceptively simple but required advanced techniques to solve. The kind of problem designed to separate serious mathematicians from pretenders. This is a screening-level challenge. Anyone unable to solve this probably shouldn't bother registering for the actual competition. Students bent over their notebooks, working through the problem. Victoria watched them with satisfaction, enjoying the familiar sight of mathematical struggle. "I have a solution." The voice came from the back of the auditorium. Victoria's head snapped toward the sound. Her blood ran cold. Marcus Green stood near the rear exit, still wearing his maintenance uniform. His cleaning cart parked against the wall. He had stopped in the middle of his rounds to watch the announcement. And now he was walking toward the front of the room. "I'm sorry." Victoria's voice dripped with false politeness. "I didn't realize the cleaning staff had opinions about advanced mathematics. The problem you wrote has a simpler solution than the standard approach." Marcus kept walking, his eyes fixed on the blackboard. "You can solve it through substitution and pattern recognition, but there's a more elegant method using symmetry properties." The auditorium fell silent. 600 pairs of eyes tracked Marcus as he approached the blackboard like a man walking toward his own execution. Victoria stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, gesturing toward the chalk. "By all means, enlighten us." Marcus picked up the chalk. For 3 heartbeats, he stood motionless, studying the problem. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. This was the moment he would realize he was out of his depth. The moment his working-class delusions would crash against the cold reality of genuine mathematical sophistication. Then Marcus began to write. His handwriting was precise, professional. Nothing like what Victoria expected from a man who spent his nights emptying trash cans. The symbols flowed across the blackboard with confident grace. But it was his approach that made Victoria's smile falter. Instead of the standard technique that students were grinding through in their notebooks, Marcus used a clever transformation that exploited the underlying symmetry of the trigonometric functions. His method cut the problem in half, revealing why the integral had its particular value, rather than just computing it through brute force. By recognizing the mirror symmetry, Marcus explained, his voice calm and clear. "We can transform this into a much simpler form. Same answer, but with half the work. More importantly, this method shows the underlying mathematical structure instead of hiding it behind complicated calculations." He set down the chalk. The answer matched the standard solution perfectly. Scattered applause broke out before dying under Victoria's withering glare. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was sophisticated mathematical reasoning delivered by someone who was supposed to be cleaning floors. Interesting approach. Victoria's voice betrayed none of her inner turmoil. But parlor tricks don't prove mathematical maturity. Let me give you something more substantial. She strode to the blackboard and wrote a differential equation, not just any equation, but one from her own doctoral research. A problem that had taken her 3 years to solve with unlimited resources and expert guidance. "This," she announced, turning to face Marcus with cold triumph, "is real mathematics. This is what separates genuine scholars from enthusiastic amateurs." The equation filled half the blackboard. Graduate students in the audience exchanged nervous glances, recognizing the complexity of what they were seeing. Victoria stepped closer to Marcus, close enough to see the uncertainty flicker across his face. "Tell you what," she said, loud enough for every microphone to capture. "Solve this equation and I'll marry you." Laughter erupted through the auditorium. The joke was cruel, deliberately designed to humiliate. Everyone understood that no one could solve this problem cold, not without years of specialized training and access to advanced computational resources. But Marcus didn't laugh. He stared at the equation for 30 seconds that stretched into eternity. Victoria watched his eyes move across the symbols, tracking relationships she couldn't follow, making connections she couldn't see. Then, slowly, he reached for the chalk. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice cracked. "This is a doctoral-level problem. You can't possibly—" "May I?" Marcus asked quietly. Victoria stepped back, suddenly uncertain. "Be my guest. When you fail, perhaps you'll finally understand your place." Marcus began to write. At first, his approach made no sense. He wasn't using the advanced techniques Victoria had employed in her dissertation. He wasn't applying the sophisticated mathematical machinery that her doctoral committee had praised so highly. Instead, he started from first principles. Basic calculus, fundamental relationships, the kind of foundation that any serious mathematician takes for granted but rarely returns to. Minutes passed. The auditorium grew utterly silent. 600 people watched a janitor work through equations that should have been impossible for him to understand, let alone solve. Victoria's certainty crumbled with every line Marcus wrote. His method was unconventional, almost primitive by modern standards. But it was working. Each step built logically on the previous one, creating a pathway through the mathematical wilderness that Victoria had never considered. After 15 minutes, Marcus set down the chalk and stepped back. The proof was complete. Victoria stared at the blackboard, her face drained of color. She checked his work once, twice, 3 times. Every line was correct. The solution matched her own research exactly. "How?" she whispered, her voice failing her for the first time in decades. Marcus looked at her with those same calm, dark eyes that had watched her scream at him 3 days ago. "Mathematics doesn't care about credentials, Professor. It doesn't care about pedigree or position. It only cares about truth." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And the truth doesn't need a PhD to recognize it." The auditorium exploded. Students leaped to their feet. Phones appeared everywhere, recording, photographing, capturing the moment when a janitor had solved a problem that stumped Harvard professors. Victoria stood alone at the front of the room, surrounded by chaos, watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. She had spent her entire career building walls between the intellectual elite and everyone else. Those walls were supposed to protect the sanctity of academic achievement, ensuring only the worthy received recognition. Now, a man in a maintenance uniform had just knocked those walls down in front of 600 witnesses. And the worst part, the part that twisted in Victoria's chest like a knife, was that she couldn't stop staring at him. Couldn't stop wondering who he really was. Couldn't stop feeling something that terrified her far more than mathematical embarrassment: attraction. By midnight, Janitor Genius was trending nationwide. By morning, it had gone international. Victoria sat alone in her dark office, scrolling through social media posts that dissected every second of her humiliation. Memes mocked her "solve this and I'll marry you" challenge. Commentary analyzed Marcus's elegant proof technique. Academic Twitter exploded with debates about formal education versus natural talent. And underneath every post, the same question repeated: who is this janitor? Victoria had asked herself the same thing for hours. She had searched every database she could access: university records, academic publications, conference attendee lists. Nothing. Marcus Green didn't exist in the mathematical world. No papers, no presentations, no university affiliations beyond his janitorial position at Preston. He was a ghost, a phantom who had appeared from nowhere, solved an impossible problem, and vanished back into the shadows of academic buildings he was paid to clean. Victoria's phone buzzed. Jonathan's name flashed on the screen. "Catherine, this is a disaster." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "Do you have any idea how this looks? A janitor embarrassing you in front of the entire mathematical community?" "I'm aware, Jonathan." "You need to fix this. Challenge him publicly. Put him through a competition he can't win. Show everyone that this was a fluke." Victoria's hand tightened around her phone. "And if it wasn't a fluke?" Silence. Then Jonathan laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that Victoria had heard him direct at others, but never at her. "Don't be ridiculous, Catherine. He's a janitor. He probably memorized solutions to famous problems hoping for exactly this kind of attention. Call his bluff. Make him solve something he hasn't prepared for. And if he does..." "He won't." Jonathan's voice hardened. "People like that don't have what it takes for real mathematical achievement. He got lucky once. Luck doesn't repeat." Victoria ended the call without saying goodbye. She stared out her window at the darkened campus, thinking about luck. Thinking about certainty. Thinking about a man in a faded uniform who had looked at her with something that might have been pity. Tomorrow, she would officially invite Marcus Green to compete in the Eilers Challenge. She told herself it was to expose him as a fraud. But deep down in a place she wasn't ready to examine, Victoria Blackwood suspected something far more dangerous. She needed to know if everything she believed about intelligence achievement and human worth was wrong. And she was terrified of the answer. The morning after the incident, Victoria arrived at her office before dawn. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus Green's chalk moving across the blackboard, with impossible precision solving problems that should have been beyond him. Her first act was to draft the official competition invitation. Her second was to design qualifying problems specifically intended to expose the gaps in informal education. If Marcus Green had somehow memorized solutions to famous problems, she would force him into unfamiliar territory where pattern recognition and lucky guesses couldn't save him. The invitation appeared in Marcus's employee mailbox that afternoon, slipped between a schedule change notice and a reminder about updated cleaning protocols. Marcus found it during his dinner break sitting alone in the basement maintenance room, where staff ate their meals away from the eyes of students and faculty who preferred their support workers invisible. "What's that?" asked Raymond, a 63-year-old custodian who had worked at Preston for 31 years and had seen every kind of academic drama imaginable. Marcus handed him the letter. Raymond read it twice, his weathered face shifting from confusion to concern. "This professor wants you to compete in some math contest, the same one who screamed at you in front of all those kids." "Looks that way." "Son, this smells like a trap." Raymond set the letter down and fixed Marcus with the hard stare of a man who had learned to survive in spaces that weren't built for people like him. "She wants to humiliate you. Make an example. Show everyone what happens when the help forgets their place." "Probably." "Then why are you smiling?" Marcus folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. "Because she's scared, Raymond. She wouldn't go to this much trouble if she wasn't scared of what I might be." "Scared people are dangerous, Marcus. Especially scared people with power." "I know." Marcus stood and reached for his cleaning cart. "But I've been invisible for 5 years. Invisible doesn't change anything. Invisible doesn't pay my mother's medical bills. Invisible doesn't prove that people like us deserve to be seen." Raymond shook his head slowly. "Your daddy was the same way. Couldn't leave well enough alone. Always had to stand up, speak out, push back against people who could crush him without breaking a sweat. How'd that work out for him?" "He died happy." Raymond's voice softened. "Died knowing he'd made a difference, even if it was just in his little corner of the world. Died knowing his son was going to be something special." He paused. "But he also died broke, Marcus. Died worn out from fighting battles he couldn't win. Don't let pride destroy what's left of your life." Marcus gripped the handle of his cart. "It's not pride, Raymond. It's something else." "What?" "I don't know yet." Marcus pushed through the door into the fluorescent-lit hallway. "But I'm going to find out." Registration opened the following morning. 12 candidates qualified for the main competition, 11 of them bearing credentials that read like a tour of academic royalty. Harvard, MIT, Yale, Stanford, Cambridge. Each name accompanied by published papers, research grants, and letters of recommendation from mathematical luminaries. Then, there was Marcus Green, listed simply as University Maintenance Staff. Victoria conducted the preliminary screening personally, an unusual step for a department head, but necessary under the circumstances. If Marcus was going to fail, she wanted to witness every moment of his collapse. The screening room held 12 desks arranged in a semicircle facing a projection screen. 11 candidates wore the casual confidence of people who had never doubted their belonging in academic spaces. Designer clothes, expensive watches, laptops bearing stickers from prestigious conferences and elite summer programs. Marcus wore his maintenance uniform. He had come directly from his shift, unable to afford the time off that changing clothes would require. His presence drew stares and whispered comments that he pretended not to hear. "Welcome to the Ehlers Challenge Preliminary Screening," Victoria announced, her voice crisp with authority. "You will have 90 minutes to solve 3 problems of increasing difficulty. Complete solutions are required for advancement. Partial credit will not be awarded." She paused, her eyes finding Marcus in the back row. "These problems require years of formal mathematical training. They cannot be solved through memorization or guesswork. They demand genuine understanding of advanced theory. Derek Chen from Harvard cracked his knuckles and shot Marcus a contemptuous look. Sarah Mitchell, Victoria's own protege, kept her eyes fixed forward, refusing to acknowledge the janitor's presence. Begin. The first problem appeared on screen. Finding the maximum value of a function subject to constraints, a classic optimization challenge that required careful analysis of critical points and boundary behavior. Marcus read the problem 3 times. Around him, other candidates immediately began writing their pens, moving with practiced efficiency through standard techniques they had drilled thousands of times. Marcus closed his eyes. He wasn't thinking about formulas. He was thinking about shapes, about curves touching curves, about the geometry hiding beneath the algebraic surface. When he opened his eyes, he saw it. The constraint curve and the objective function dancing together in his mind, like partners in a waltz. The maximum occurred where they touched, where one curve kissed the other at exactly one point. He began to draw. While other candidates filled pages with calculations, Marcus sketched a simple diagram showing 2 curves meeting at a single point. The solution emerged from the picture itself, elegant and immediate, requiring no complex algebra at all. Victoria watched from the front of the room, her expression unreadable. She had expected Marcus to struggle with the first problem, to waste precious time attempting techniques beyond his training. Instead, he was finishing before candidates who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of challenge. The second problem involved matrix analysis, determining eigenvalues and their multiplicities, understanding how a linear transformation acted on different subspaces. Again, Marcus approached the problem differently than his competitors. Where they computed determinants and solved characteristic equations through brute force, Marcus noticed a pattern in the matrix structure that made the answer obvious. The matrix was almost diagonal, already its secrets visible to anyone willing to look beyond standard procedures. He wrote his answer in 4 lines. Other candidates were still filling their second page. The third problem was the elimination challenge, a famous historical problem about infinite series that had stumped mathematicians for decades before Euler himself had solved it in the 18th century. Victoria had chosen this problem deliberately. It required not just technical skill, but knowledge of mathematical history, an understanding of classical methods that modern education often neglected in favor of more powerful contemporary techniques. Marcus smiled when he saw it. He knew this problem. Not because he had memorized Euler's solution, but because he had spent countless nights in empty lecture halls, reading about the history of mathematics, falling in love with the stories of great minds who had wrestled with exactly these kinds of challenges. He wrote Euler's original approach, explaining not just how to solve the problem, but why the solution worked. Why it had eluded so many brilliant mathematicians before Euler's insight cracked it open. Time. Victoria called, though 40 minutes still remained on the clock. She collected the papers herself, unwilling to let anyone else see the results first. Marcus's solutions were not just correct, they were elegant. They revealed understanding that transcended mere technical competence, insight that couldn't be faked or memorized. Victoria's hands trembled as she reviewed his work. The evidence was undeniable now. This man, this janitor, possessed mathematical abilities that rivaled or exceeded any graduate student she had ever taught. How was this possible? Where had he learned these techniques? Why was someone with this kind of mind pushing a mop through academic buildings instead of pushing the boundaries of mathematical knowledge? All candidates advanced to the main competition. Victoria announced, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. Round 1 begins tomorrow at 9 a.m. in the main auditorium. As candidates filed out, Dr. Eleanor Chen from Stanford approached Victoria with an expression of troubled fascination. "That janitor's solutions," Eleanor said quietly. "They remind me of someone." "Who?" Eleanor shook her head. "I can't place it, but his mathematical style, his way of seeing problems through geometric intuition rather than algebraic machinery, it's distinctive, almost familiar." "You're imagining things." Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. He's probably a failed graduate student who washed out of some program years ago. Happens more often than people realize. Maybe? Eleanor studied Victoria's face. But I've been teaching for 25 years, Catherine. I've seen a lot of mathematical minds in that time. This one is different. This one is special. Victoria turned away before Eleanor could see the doubt in her eyes. That night, Victoria did something she had never done before. She drove to the neighborhood where university maintenance staff lived, parking her luxury sedan on streets lined with modest homes and aging apartment buildings. She told herself she was gathering intelligence, understanding her opponent, preparing for the competition ahead. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She needed to see Marcus Green as a person, not just a threat to everything she believed about intelligence and achievement. She found his address in employee records. A small apartment in a converted Victorian house, the kind of building that had once housed single families, but now sheltered 4 or 5 separate households, struggling to afford even these diminished quarters. Victoria sat in her car for an hour, watching lights flicker in windows, watching shadows move behind curtains. At 11 p.m., a taxi pulled up. A woman emerged, moving slowly with the careful steps of someone managing chronic pain. Marcus appeared at the building's entrance, hurrying down the steps to help her. Victoria watched him guide his mother up the stairs, his arm steady around her waist, his voice too quiet to hear, but clearly gentle. At the door, he paused to adjust her scarf against the cold before leading her inside. The interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but it shattered something in Victoria's chest. This was the man she had screamed at. The man she had called a janitor with contempt dripping from every syllable. The man she was trying to destroy in front of the entire mathematical community. And he spent his nights caring for his sick mother with more tenderness than Victoria had shown another human being in years. She drove home in silence, unable to escape the question that kept circling through her thoughts. What if she was wrong about everything? Round 1 drew a crowd that exceeded all expectations. The auditorium's 600 seats filled within minutes of the doors opening. Another 200 people stood along the walls and in the aisles, unwilling to miss what social media had transformed from an academic competition into a cultural event. The live stream launched with 50,000 viewers. Within an hour, that number had doubled. Victoria took the stage with confidence she no longer fully felt. Welcome to the first round of the Euler's Challenge. 12 candidates will compete today. 6 will advance to tomorrow's semifinals. Her eyes swept the contestant area, finding Marcus among the 11 other competitors. He still wore his maintenance uniform, a deliberate choice that the cameras couldn't ignore. Today's challenge requires candidates to prove a fundamental mathematical truth. Demonstrate that the sum of the first n odd numbers always equals n squared. A murmur ran through the audience. The problem was well known, almost elementary by competition standards. Victoria had chosen it deliberately to build confidence in her legitimate candidates while giving Marcus rope to hang himself with overconfidence. You have 30 minutes. Complete proofs only. Style and elegance will be considered in judging. The candidates dispersed to individual whiteboards arranged across the stage. Cameras tracked their movements as they began to work. Derek Chen from Harvard attacked the problem with algebraic induction, building a rigorous proof through formal logical steps that any textbook would approve. Sarah Mitchell used a similar approach, her handwriting neat and precise, her reasoning impeccable. Marcus stood motionless before his whiteboard for nearly 5 minutes. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. Perhaps the pressure was finally getting to him. Perhaps the reality of competing against formally trained mathematicians was breaking through whatever delusional confidence had brought him this far. Then Marcus picked up his marker and began to draw. Not equations, not symbols, pictures. He drew dots arranged in squares. 1 dot. Then 4 dots in a 2x2 pattern. Then 9 dots in a 3x3 pattern. Around each square, he showed how adding odd numbers created the next larger square. 1 dot plus 3 dots arranged in an L shape equaled 4 dots in a square. 4 dots plus 5 dots in a larger L shape equaled 9 dots. The pattern was visual, immediate, undeniable. Anyone watching could see why the sum of odd numbers produced perfect squares. The proof required no advanced mathematics at all, just the ability to see what had always been true. "Beautiful," whispered a Stanford professor in the audience. "Brilliant," agreed a mathematician watching via live stream from Tokyo. Victoria's smile vanished. Marcus stepped back from his whiteboard and addressed the audience directly. "Mathematics isn't about memorizing formulas or following procedures. It's about seeing patterns, about understanding why things work, not just that they work." He gestured at his simple diagram. "A child could understand this proof. That doesn't make it less rigorous. It makes it more true." The auditorium erupted in applause. Victoria gripped the podium, her knuckles white. The janitor had just delivered a masterclass in mathematical exposition to an international audience, making her Harvard-trained candidates look like calculating machines incapable of genuine insight. "Visual proofs are not rigorous," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the applause. "Academic mathematics requires formal logical structure." Dr. Eleanor Chen rose from her seat in the judging panel. "Actually, Catherine, visual proofs have a long and distinguished history in mathematics. Euclid himself used geometric reasoning extensively. Mr. Green's proof is not only rigorous, but demonstrates the kind of deep understanding we should be cultivating in all our students." Victoria's jaw tightened. She had been publicly contradicted by a fellow judge, her authority undermined in front of cameras broadcasting to 100,000 viewers. The scoring was unanimous. Marcus Green advanced to semifinals with the highest marks of the round. After the competition ended, Victoria retreated to her office, refusing interviews, ignoring calls. She sat in darkness, staring at her certificates on the wall, wondering if they meant anything at all. A knock at her door interrupted her spiral. "Go away." The door opened anyway. Dr. Eleanor Chen entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk, Catherine." "I have nothing to say." "Then listen." Eleanor sat in the chair across from Victoria's desk, her expression serious. "I remembered who Marcus Green reminds me of." Victoria looked up despite herself. 15 years ago, I had a doctoral student at MIT. Most brilliant mathematical mind I've ever encountered. Natural intuition that couldn't be taught, combined with genuine love for the beauty of mathematics. He was going to change the field. What happened to him? His mother got cancer. Eleanor's voice softened. He withdrew 3 weeks before his dissertation defense, gave up everything to take care of her. I tried to convince him to stay, offered extensions, alternative arrangements. He refused, said his mother needed him more than mathematics needed another PhD. Victoria's blood ran cold. What was his name? Marcus Green. The words landed like bombs in the silent office. I've been trying to contact him for years, Eleanor continued. Lost track of him when he moved to care for his mother. Never imagined I'd find him working as a janitor at a university I was visiting. Victoria couldn't speak. The implications crashed over her like waves, each one more devastating than the last. She had spent weeks trying to destroy a man who had sacrificed a brilliant academic career to care for his dying mother. She had screamed at him, humiliated him, designed an entire competition to expose him as a fraud. And he was more accomplished than she had ever been. His doctoral work was extraordinary, Eleanor said quietly. He was studying connections between classical analysis and modern quantum mechanics. His dissertation would have been groundbreaking. Probably still would be if he ever finished it. Why didn't you say something earlier? I wasn't certain until today. 7 years changes a person. But watching him solve that problem, seeing his mathematical style, it's unmistakable. Eleanor paused. Catherine, what exactly are you trying to prove with this competition? Victoria had no answer. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to destroy a man who's already suffered more than most people can imagine. A man who gave up his dreams to do the right thing. A man whose only crime was correcting your mathematics in front of students. He embarrassed me. He helped you. The error was real. He prevented you from teaching your students something incorrect. Eleanor stood. Think about who you want to be, Catherine. The woman who lifted others up, or the woman who tore them down because they threatened her ego? She left without waiting for a response. Victoria sat alone in the darkness, Eleanor's words echoing through her thoughts. For the first time in her adult life, she wondered if she had become the villain in someone else's story. The semifinals were scheduled for the following afternoon, but the real competition began that morning on social media. Academic Twitter exploded with debates about credential versus talent. News outlets ran features on Marcus Green, the mysterious janitor who was humiliating Ivy League graduates in mathematical combat. Interview requests flooded Preston's communications office, most of them asking for access to the man nobody could find information about. But darker elements emerged alongside the celebration. Jonathan Webb published an editorial in the Harvard Mathematical Review titled "The Dangerous Myth of Natural Genius." His argument was clear: celebrating untrained individuals undermined the legitimate achievements of formally educated mathematicians. People like Marcus Green were anomalies at best, frauds at worst, and treating them as equals damaged the entire academic enterprise. The piece went viral. Thousands shared it with approving comments about maintaining standards and protecting institutional integrity. Others pushed back hard. A Stanford professor wrote that mathematics had always benefited from outsiders who saw problems differently. A Princeton researcher pointed out that many of history's greatest mathematicians had been self-taught or unconventionally trained. Marcus watched none of it. He was too busy working his 3 jobs, caring for his mother, and preparing for a competition that could change everything. "You should read what people are saying about you," his mother said, showing him her phone. "You're famous, baby." "Fame doesn't pay medical bills." "No, but $50,000 does." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Win this thing, Marcus. Not for pride, not for revenge. Win it because you deserve to be seen, because your father deserved to be seen, because everyone who ever looked through people like us deserves to know that we see them too." Marcus kissed her forehead. "I'm going to try, Mama." "Don't try. Succeed." Her eyes burned with fierce conviction. "Show them what they've been missing all these years. Show them what we're really made of." The semi-final challenge appeared on screen at exactly 2 p.m., broadcast to an audience that had swollen to nearly 200,000 viewers worldwide. Victoria read the problem aloud, her voice professionally neutral despite the turmoil beneath. "Determine the convergence properties of this infinite mathematical series and analyze its behavior under varying conditions." The technical language intimidated most viewers, but mathematicians recognized the difficulty immediately. This was graduate-level analysis, the kind of problem that required years of specialized training to approach competently. 6 candidates remained: Sarah Mitchell, Derek Chen, Marcus Green. 3 others whose names would soon be forgotten. They had 90 minutes to produce complete solutions. Marcus stared at the problem, feeling the weight of 200,000 eyes watching his every move. This wasn't like the previous challenges. Visual intuition wouldn't save him here. He needed actual knowledge, formal techniques, mathematical machinery he had only studied in stolen moments between cleaning shifts. For 30 agonizing minutes he struggled. False starts, dead ends, approaches that collapsed under their own weight. Victoria watched from the judging table, hope and despair warring in her chest. Part of her wanted Marcus to fail to prove that her worldview wasn't completely broken. Another part, growing stronger by the minute, wanted him to succeed in ways she couldn't explain. At the 40-minute mark, something shifted in Marcus's expression. He stopped fighting the problem and started listening to it. The infinite series wasn't random. It had structure, pattern, meaning. Like a song with verses and choruses, the mathematical terms repeated in predictable ways that revealed their underlying nature. Marcus began to write. Not the sophisticated techniques that graduate students were using. Something older. Something classical. Methods that his father had taught him decades ago. Ways of thinking about infinity that modern education had largely abandoned in favor of more powerful but less intuitive approaches. The series behaved like a bouncing ball, he realized. Sometimes the bounces got smaller until they stopped. Sometimes they grew larger forever. The mathematics told you which behavior to expect if you knew how to listen. He translated this physical intuition into rigorous proof, showing not just whether the series converged, but why connecting abstract mathematics to concrete understanding in ways that made the judges lean forward in their seats. When time expired, Marcus stepped back from his whiteboard. Dr. Eleanor Chen reviewed his work with tears in her eyes. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "This is exactly the approach from his doctoral research. He's been continuing his work all these years even while—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The results were announced to thunderous applause. 3 candidates advanced to the championship round: Sarah Mitchell, Derek Chen, Marcus Green. Victoria stood at the podium, looking out at an auditorium that had transformed from her personal domain into something larger, something she no longer controlled. Tomorrow would bring the final challenge. The ultimate test of everything she believed about intelligence achievement and human worth. She had designed it to destroy Marcus Green. Now she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. Victoria didn't sleep the night before the championship round. She sat at her desk until 3 a.m, refining the problem that would end Marcus Green's improbable run once and for all. Her doctoral dissertation had taken 3 years to complete. 3 years of unlimited resources, expert guidance, access to the finest mathematical libraries in the world. 3 years of collaboration with advisors who had dedicated their careers to the specific techniques required. She would give Marcus 90 minutes. The cruelty of it should have bothered her. Instead, Victoria felt only the cold satisfaction of someone about to restore natural order to a world that had temporarily gone insane. Jonathan arrived at her apartment at 6 a.m., bringing coffee and confidence she desperately needed. "Today's the day," he said, kissing her cheek with the practiced affection of a man who viewed relationships as professional partnerships. "After this, nobody will remember the janitor's lucky streak. They'll only remember how spectacularly he failed when faced with real mathematics." "What if he doesn't fail?" Jonathan laughed. "Catherine, be serious. Your dissertation problem required techniques from 4 different advanced fields: functional analysis, operator theory, differential, geometry, mathematical physics. Nobody solves that without years of specialized training, no matter how naturally talented they might be." Eleanor Chen said he was working on similar problems during his doctoral research. Doctoral research he abandoned 7 years ago. Jonathan set down his coffee with dismissive finality. Whatever he knew then, he's forgotten by now. You can't maintain mathematical sophistication while pushing a mop. The mind doesn't work that way. Victoria wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. Because if Jonathan was wrong, if Marcus Green solved her dissertation problem in 90 minutes in front of 200,000 viewers, then everything she had built her identity around would collapse into dust. "I should go," she said, reaching for her briefcase. "The competition starts in 4 hours. Jonathan caught her hand. "Catherine, after today, we should talk about our future. Harvard has an opening in the department. With your credentials and my connections, you'd be a perfect fit. We could be colleagues as well as partners. Let me get through today first." "Of course." He smiled with the easy confidence of a man who had never faced real challenge. "Go destroy that janitor. I'll be watching from the front row." The auditorium was packed beyond capacity by 8 a.m., a full hour before the competition was scheduled to begin. Campus security had stopped counting after the first 1,000 people pushed through the doors. Fire marshals threatened to shut down the event until university administrators intervened with promises of additional safety measures. The live stream launched at 8:30 with 250,000 viewers already waiting. That number climbed steadily as the clock ticked toward 9. Victoria took the stage at exactly 9 a.m., her heels clicking against the hardwood with practiced authority. 3 podiums waited at the front of the auditorium, each equipped with a whiteboard, markers, and a small desk. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the championship round of the Euler's Challenge. Her voice carried across the packed room and through speakers that broadcast her words to 250,000 people worldwide. Today's final 3 candidates represent the pinnacle of mathematical achievement. Sarah Mitchell, doctoral candidate at Preston University, with 2 published papers in leading journals. Derek Chen, Harvard graduate student and recipient of the prestigious Putnam Fellowship. And Marcus Green, University maintenance staff. She let the contrast hang in the air, allowing cameras to capture the visual absurdity of a janitor standing alongside Ivy League royalty. The championship format consists of 3 phases. First, candidates will solve a research-level problem in 90 minutes. Second, they will present their solutions to our expert judging panel. Third, they will defend their approaches against rigorous questioning from mathematical specialists. Victoria paused, savoring the moment. Given the unprecedented international attention this competition has received, I am implementing what I call the Blackwood Standard, the most demanding examination of mathematical maturity ever attempted in a public forum. Dr. Eleanor Chen shifted uncomfortably in her judging seat. Something about Victoria's tone suggested this had stopped being about mathematical excellence long ago. The championship problem will now be revealed. Victoria pressed a button on her remote control. The equation appeared on the massive screen behind her, filling the auditorium with symbols that made most viewers' eyes glaze over. Marcus's blood turned to ice. He recognized the structure immediately. This wasn't just a difficult problem. This was Victoria's doctoral research, the work that had established her reputation as one of the leading mathematicians of her generation. She had spent 3 years solving this equation with every advantage the academic world could provide. She was giving him 90 minutes. Candidates? Victoria announced, her eyes finding Marcus with cold triumph. You may begin. Sarah Mitchell and Derek Chen moved to their whiteboards with practiced confidence. As Victoria's protege and Harvard's representative respectively, they had advantages Marcus couldn't match. Sarah had studied Victoria's published papers, extensively understanding her methods and approaches. Derek had access to Harvard's mathematical resources, including detailed analyses of Victoria's dissertation techniques. Marcus stood motionless before his whiteboard, the marker hanging limp in his hand. The problem demanded knowledge from multiple advanced fields. Functional analysis, which studied infinite dimensional spaces with techniques far beyond ordinary calculus. Operator theory, which examined mathematical transformations so abstract they made most graduate students weep. Differential geometry, which twisted and curved space itself in ways that defied normal intuition. Each field required years of dedicated study to master. Marcus had learned pieces of them during his abandoned doctoral work and his stolen nights of study, but he had never attempted to combine them at this level of sophistication. Victoria's voice cut through his paralysis. The clock is running, Mr. Green. 90 minutes to prove everything you've claimed about mathematical talent versus formal education. She was baiting him. Marcus knew it, but the bait was working. He looked at the equation again, forcing his mind to engage, despite the fear threatening to shut him down. Think, he told himself. Don't panic. Think. The first 10 minutes produced nothing. Marcus made tentative marks on his whiteboard, erased them, started again. The approaches he attempted led nowhere. Dead ends that consumed precious time without advancing his understanding. Meanwhile, Sarah and Derek were making steady progress. Their whiteboards filled with sophisticated equations, standard techniques applied with mechanical precision. They knew exactly what Victoria expected, because they had studied her methods for years. At 20 minutes, Victoria began providing commentary for the live stream audience. What we're witnessing illustrates the fundamental difference between authentic mathematical education and enthusiastic amateur interest. Notice how the formally trained candidates are systematically building their solutions using established theoretical frameworks. Meanwhile, our informal participant, appears to be struggling with the basic structure of the problem." The words were designed to break him. Marcus felt them land like physical blows, each one a reminder that he didn't belong here, had never belonged here, would never belong anywhere that mattered. At 30 minutes, his whiteboard was still nearly empty. At 45 minutes, Derek Chen stepped back from his work with a satisfied smile. His solution wasn't complete, but he had clearly established a viable pathway using techniques from Victoria's published papers. At 60 minutes, Sarah Mitchell finished her first draft. Her approach followed Victoria's dissertation methods, almost exactly adapted slightly for the specific problem at hand. Marcus had produced almost nothing. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hand trembled around the marker. 250,000 people were watching him fail in real time, and he couldn't make his mind work. "Perhaps," Victoria suggested to the cameras, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "struggling participants should consider withdrawing gracefully rather than continuing this painful display. Some challenges simply exceed the limits of informal preparation, no matter how sincere the enthusiasm." Something cracked inside Marcus, not his confidence, something else, something that had been holding him back without his knowing. He had been trying to solve the problem Victoria's way. Using techniques, she had developed approaches, she had pioneered methods that required her specific training and resources. But Marcus wasn't Victoria Blackwood. He was Marcus Green, son of a Baltimore math teacher who had taught him that mathematics was poetry music, the underlying language of reality itself. He was the boy who had fallen in love with numbers not through formal education, but through wonder, through beauty, through the joy of seeing patterns that others missed. Victoria's methods weren't the only way. They weren't even the best way. They were just her way. What was his way? Marcus closed his eyes. Around him, the auditorium buzz faded into background noise. The cameras, the judges, the 250,000 viewers, none of it mattered anymore. He thought about his father standing at a chalkboard in a Baltimore classroom, explaining calculus to teenagers who thought they would never use mathematics in their lives. He thought about the elegant simplicity of his father's approach, the way he made complex ideas feel natural and inevitable. He thought about his own doctoral research, abandoned but never forgotten. The connections he had been exploring between classical analysis and modern physics. The insights that had made Eleanor Chen call him the most brilliant student she had ever taught. He thought about the problem in front of him, not as Victoria had framed it with all her sophisticated machinery and advanced techniques, but as a fundamental question about the nature of mathematical reality. What was this equation really asking? Strip away the technical language? Ignore the intimidating symbols. What did it mean? Marcus opened his eyes. "It's a minimization problem," he whispered. Victoria heard him from across the stage. "Excuse me." Marcus didn't answer. He was already moving his marker, flying across the whiteboard with sudden certainty. Victoria's equation described a complicated mathematical system with many interacting parts. She had solved it by analyzing each part separately, using specialized tools for each component, then combining the results through elaborate mathematical machinery. But there was another way. The system wanted to minimize something. Like water flowing downhill, like a ball rolling to the bottom of a bowl, the mathematical configuration sought its lowest energy state. If Marcus could identify what was being minimized, he could find the solution without any of Victoria's sophisticated techniques, classical variational methods. The approach that mathematicians had used for centuries before modern abstraction made everything unnecessarily complicated. Find the quantity being minimized, set up the conditions for a minimum solve. It was elegant. It was simple. It was exactly what Victoria would never expect. "What is he doing?" Jonathan Webb muttered from the front row. "I don't know," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confidence. The symbols appearing on Marcus's whiteboard weren't the techniques from her dissertation. They were something older, something almost forgotten in the rush toward mathematical modernization. With 65 minutes remaining on the clock, Marcus had finally found his approach. But finding the approach and executing it were different challenges entirely. The classical methods required careful setup, precise reasoning, attention to details that could derail the entire solution if handled incorrectly. Marcus worked faster than he had ever worked in his life. His marker moved in confident strokes, building the argument line by line, brick by brick, each step supporting the next in an edifice of pure logic. At 75 minutes remaining, he encountered his first serious obstacle. The minimization approach required proving that a minimum actually existed, that the mathematical landscape didn't just slope downward forever without ever reaching bottom. In modern treatments, this was handled with sophisticated compactness arguments that Marcus had never formally studied. But he remembered something from his doctoral research. A classical technique for establishing existence, one that didn't require the heavy machinery of modern functional analysis. He applied it. The proof clicked into place. At 60 minutes remaining, Marcus hit another wall. Even after establishing existence, he needed to characterize the minimum. What did it look like? What properties did it have? Victoria's methods used operator theory to answer these questions. Techniques Marcus knew only from textbook summaries and late-night reading sessions. He couldn't follow her path. He needed his own. Think he commanded himself. What do you actually know? What can you actually prove? The minimum satisfied certain conditions. Marcus wrote them down, translating the abstract mathematical requirements into concrete equations he could manipulate. The conditions looked complicated at first, but as he stared at them, patterns began to emerge. Symmetry. The problem had symmetry he hadn't noticed before. He exploited it. The complicated conditions simplified dramatically, reducing to a form he could actually solve. At 45 minutes remaining, Marcus realized he might actually finish this. Victoria watched his progress with growing alarm. She didn't understand his approach, couldn't follow his reasoning, but she recognized genuine mathematical momentum when she saw it. The janitor was building something real on that whiteboard, something that might actually constitute a valid solution. "This is impossible," Jonathan said loud enough for nearby audience members to hear. "He can't be solving that problem with classical methods. It requires functional analysis operator theory. You can't bypass that with 19th century techniques." "Then explain what he's doing," Victoria replied, her voice hollow. Jonathan couldn't. At 30 minutes remaining, Marcus encountered his final obstacle. His solution was almost complete, but the last step required a technical estimate that he wasn't sure how to prove. Victoria's approach had handled this with Sobolev, embedding theorems, powerful tools from modern analysis that characterized how mathematical functions behaved under various operations. Marcus didn't know Sobolev embeddings. He had read about them, understood their basic purpose, but had never developed the technical mastery to apply them in novel situations. He needed another way. The clock showed 28 minutes remaining, then 27, 26. "Think about what you're really asking," Marcus told himself. "What does this estimate mean physically?" The estimate controlled how rapidly certain quantities could change. In physical terms, it was asking how much energy was required to create sharp peaks or sudden jumps in the mathematical configuration. Marcus thought about energy, about how physical systems behaved, about the intuition his father had instilled in him decades ago, the understanding that mathematics described real phenomena in the real world. A physical system couldn't change infinitely fast. There were natural limits, constraints imposed by the conservation laws that governed reality. Those constraints should translate into mathematical estimates. He wrote down the physical reasoning. Then he translated it into rigorous mathematics, using basic calculus and fundamental inequalities that any undergraduate could verify. The estimate he needed followed as a consequence. At 15 minutes remaining, Marcus completed his solution. He stepped back from the whiteboard, breathing hard, hardly daring to believe what he had accomplished. The proof covered every inch of available space, dense with symbols and reasoning, but complete. Complete. Victoria moved toward his whiteboard as if drawn by invisible force. Her eyes traced through his argument, checking each step, looking for the fatal error that would prove she had been right all along. She checked once, twice, 3 times. There was no error. Marcus Green had solved her doctoral dissertation problem in 75 minutes, using techniques she had never considered methods so classical they had been dismissed as obsolete for decades. "Time," the competition official announced. "All candidates step away from your work." Sarah Mitchell and Derek Chen had both produced competent solutions following Victoria's established methods. Their work was correct, thorough, exactly what any professor would expect from top graduate students. But Marcus's solution was different. It didn't just answer the question. It illuminated the question, revealed the underlying structure that made the problem difficult in the first place, showed why Victoria's sophisticated approach had been necessary for her, but not for someone who could see the deeper patterns. Dr. Eleanor Chen rose from the judging panel, tears streaming down her face. She didn't try to hide them. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I need to verify Mr. Green's solution before we continue." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor and two other expert judges examined Marcus's proof on auxiliary whiteboards. The auditorium held its collective breath. The live stream chat exploded with speculation and argument and hope. Finally, Eleanor returned to her microphone. "Mr. Green's solution is mathematically rigorous, complete, and brilliant." The auditorium erupted. Applause crashed through the room like thunder. People leaped to their feet. The live stream chat scrolled so fast it became unreadable, a blur of celebration and disbelief. "He has solved a research-level problem using classical techniques that illuminate the underlying structure in ways that more modern approaches obscure. This is not merely competent mathematics. This is profound mathematics, the kind that advances human understanding rather than merely demonstrating technical skill." Victoria stood frozen at the front of the stage, her world collapsing around her. "But those methods are outdated," she managed, her voice barely audible above the celebration. "Functional analysis, operator theory. These are the standard approaches. You can't just ignore decades of mathematical development." Marcus turned to face her directly. The moment stretched between them, charged with everything that had happened since that first confrontation in her lecture hall. "Professor Blackwood," he said, his voice calm and clear, "those techniques are certainly powerful. They have their place in mathematics, but they're not always necessary." He gestured at his whiteboard. "I solved your problem the way mathematicians solved problems for centuries before modern abstraction took over. Not because I couldn't learn your methods, but because I could see a simpler path." "Simpler isn't better," Victoria protested. "Mathematical rigor requires—" "Mathematics doesn't care about fashion," Marcus interrupted gently. "It doesn't care about credentials or pedigree, or which techniques are currently popular. It only cares about truth. And there are many paths to truth, Professor. Yours is valid. So is mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Then someone in the audience shouted the question that everyone had been thinking since Victoria's impulsive challenge days ago. "So when's the wedding, Professor Blackwood?" Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face burned as her cruel joke returned to haunt her before cameras broadcasting to 250,000 viewers. She had promised to marry whoever solved that equation. She had made the promise publicly, arrogantly, absolutely certain that no janitor could possibly succeed. Now she stood exposed before the world, her prejudice and cruelty laid bare for everyone to see. But Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't mock her or demand she honor her absurd promise. Instead, he turned to address the audience and the cameras with quiet dignity. "Mathematics brought us together today through this competition. I hope it continues to bring people together across all boundaries and assumptions about where intelligence can be found." He paused, letting his words sink in. Professor Blackwood designed a challenging problem. She wanted to test the limits of what informal education could achieve. That's a legitimate question to ask. I'm grateful she asked it because now we have an answer. His grace and victory left Victoria speechless. She had spent weeks trying to destroy this man, had screamed at him, humiliated him, designed an entire competition to prove he was nothing more than an enthusiastic amateur who had gotten lucky. And now, in the moment of his triumph, he was defending her. Why Dr. Eleanor Chen stepped forward again, her expression suggesting that the competition's revelations were not yet complete. Before we announce final results, Eleanor said, I have something important to share with everyone. The auditorium fell silent. Throughout this competition, I've been troubled by familiar feelings about Mr. Green's mathematical style. His approach, his insights, his elegant solutions. They reminded me of someone exceptional I once knew. She paused, gathering herself for what came next. I finally remembered. Marcus Green was one of my most brilliant doctoral students at MIT 7 years ago. The revelation struck like lightning. Victoria's face went completely white. Jonathan Webb half rose from his seat, his expression shifting from confusion to horror as the implications became clear. Mr. Green completed all PhD coursework with highest distinction. Eleanor continued, her voice steady, despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. He finished qualifying exams, passed comprehensive reviews, and was deep into dissertation research under my supervision. She produced an official MIT folder, holding it up for the cameras. His record, 3.97 GPA in graduate coursework. 3 published papers in leading mathematical journals. The prestigious Rhodes Fellowship. Outstanding Teaching Award. He was 3 weeks from defending his dissertation when he withdrew. Why? Someone shouted from the audience. Why would he give all that up? Eleanor's voice softened. His mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Marcus had no other family, no resources, no way to pay for her treatment while completing his degree. He made the choice that any loving son would make. He gave up his dreams to save his mother's life. The auditorium fell into stunned silence. Victoria felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had spent weeks trying to destroy a man who had sacrificed everything, a man whose credentials exceeded her own, a man who had given up academic glory to care for a dying parent. For 7 years, Eleanor said, Marcus Green has worked as a janitor, a delivery driver, and a weekend tutor. 3 jobs to pay his mother's medical bills. And in whatever stolen moments remained, he continued studying mathematics because he couldn't stop loving the subject that had once promised him everything. She turned to face Marcus directly. Your doctoral work was extraordinary. The connections you were exploring between classical analysis and quantum mechanics would have been groundbreaking. They still could be if you ever have the chance to complete them. Marcus stood silent, his expression unreadable. I've been trying to contact you for years, Eleanor continued. I lost track of you when you moved to care for your mother. I never imagined I'd find you working as a janitor at a university I was visiting for a guest lecture. The implications crashed over the audience in waves. Social media exploded with outrage and admiration, horror and hope. The hashtag #JanitorGenius transformed into #HiddenGenius, then #academic injustice. Victoria looked at the man she had spent weeks trying to destroy and finally saw him clearly. Not a janitor, not an amateur, not an enthusiastic pretender who had gotten lucky. A mathematician whose brilliance exceeded her own, whose sacrifice exceeded anything she could imagine, whose dignity exceeded everything she had thrown at him. Why didn't you say something? Victoria's voice cracked. Why didn't you tell everyone who you really were? Marcus met her eyes with the same calm steadiness that had characterized every moment of their confrontation. Because it shouldn't matter, he said quietly. My credentials shouldn't matter. My background shouldn't matter. The only thing that should matter is whether my mathematics is correct. He gestured at his whiteboard, still covered with the proof that had shattered Victoria's worldview. You designed this competition to prove that formal education was necessary for mathematical achievement. I solved your problem to prove that it wasn't. Whether I'm a janitor or a former PhD student doesn't change the truth of what I wrote on that board. But if people had known, they would have treated me differently. They would have given me respect I hadn't earned in this competition, credibility based on my past rather than my present performance. Marcus shook his head. I didn't want that. I wanted to prove something about mathematics itself. about how we recognize talent, about who we're willing to see. The competition official approached the microphone, his voice trembling with the weight of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, the results of the Eulers Challenge Championship round. Nobody cared about the results anymore. Everyone knew who had won. But the official continued anyway, bound by protocol and tradition. In third place, Derek Chen from Harvard University. Polite applause. In second place, Sarah Mitchell from Preston University. More applause, slightly warmer. And in first place, winner of the $50,000 prize and automatic PhD admission to any participating university. The pause stretched for an eternity. Marcus Green. The auditorium exploded for the final time. Standing ovations from mathematicians who understood they had witnessed history. Tears from audience members moved by a story that transcended academic achievement. Celebration from 250,000 viewers who had watched an underdog triumph against impossible odds. Victoria stood alone at the front of the stage, surrounded by joy she couldn't share, watching the man she had tried to destroy receive everything she had tried to deny him. In that moment, surrounded by celebration, Catherine Blackwood felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. The celebration lasted for hours, but Victoria didn't stay to witness it. She slipped out through a side door, while cameras focused on Marcus, accepting congratulations from mathematicians who had flown in from around the world to witness the competition. Nobody noticed her leaving. Nobody cared. The story had moved beyond her, transforming from academic contest to cultural phenomenon in the span of an afternoon. Jonathan found her in the parking garage, sitting in her car with the engine off, staring at nothing. Catherine, what are you doing? You need to be in there managing the narrative. The press wants statements. The board wants explanations. You can't just disappear. I tried to destroy him. What? Marcus Green. Victoria's voice sounded hollow, disconnected from her body. I designed that entire competition to humiliate a man who corrected my mathematics. I wanted to prove he was nothing. I wanted to prove I was right about intelligence and education, and who deserves recognition. Jonathan opened her car door and crouched beside her. Catherine, listen to me. You made reasonable assumptions based on available information. How were you supposed to know he was some MIT dropout with a tragic backstory? The real scandal here is that MIT let him slip through the cracks. He's not a dropout. He withdrew to save his mother's life. Same thing, practically speaking. Jonathan waved his hand dismissively. The point is, you have nothing to apologize for. You maintained standards. You defended institutional integrity. If anything, this proves your point about the importance of formal education. He was formally educated. He just didn't finish. Victoria looked at Jonathan as if seeing him for the first time. That's not the point at all. Of course it is. The man had MIT training. That's why he could solve your problem. Natural talent didn't save him. Institutional preparation did. You should be using this angle with the press. He solved my 3-year dissertation problem in 75 minutes using techniques I never considered. Techniques I was trained to dismiss as outdated and insufficient. Victoria's voice rose with each word. He was better than me, Jonathan. Not because of MIT. In spite of MIT. In spite of everything I threw at him. He was simply undeniably better. Jonathan stood up, his expression shifting from concern to calculation. Catherine, you're tired. You're emotional. Let's get you home and tomorrow we can figure out how to spin this. Spin this into a positive story for your career. The professor who discovered hidden genius. The academic who recognized talent despite unconventional circumstances. We can rehabilitate your image if we're strategic about it. Victoria felt something cold settle in her chest. Is that all you see? Career opportunities, image management? What else is there? She looked at the man she had dated for 3 years. The man she had imagined building a life with. The man who shared her values, her ambitions, her carefully constructed worldview. And she realized she didn't know him at all. Get out of my car, Jonathan. Catherine, Get out. He stepped back, his expression hardening. You're making a mistake. Tomorrow you're going to regret pushing away the one person who actually understands how this world works. Maybe. Victoria started her engine. But tonight, I need to understand myself. She drove for 2 hours without destination, letting the highway carry her through darkness while her mind wrestled with everything she had witnessed. The way Marcus had approached her problem. Not with the sophisticated tools she had been trained to worship, but with something older and deeper. Something that looked at mathematical truth directly instead of through layers of abstraction. The way he had defended her even in victory, had refused to humiliate her despite everything she had done to humiliate him. Had shown her more grace than she had shown anyone in her entire career. The way he had looked at her during those final moments. Not with hatred or contempt, but with something that might have been understanding. As if he saw past her cruelty to something underneath that she herself had forgotten existed. Who was Victoria Blackwood when she wasn't performing excellence? She couldn't remember. At midnight, she found herself parked outside Marcus's apartment building without any memory of deciding to drive there. The lights in his window were still on. She imagined him inside celebrating with his mother, finally receiving the recognition he had earned through brilliance and sacrifice. What would she even say to him? Sorry I screamed at you in front of my students. Sorry I designed an entire competition to prove you were worthless. Sorry I spent 3 weeks trying to destroy a man who had already survived more devastation than I could imagine. The words felt pathetically inadequate. But Victoria got out of her car anyway. She climbed the steps to Marcus's building and found the outer door unlocked. The hallway smelled like age and cleaning products, and the accumulated hopes of people struggling to survive in spaces that had never been built for thriving. His door was at the end of the second floor. She stood before it for 5 full minutes before finding the courage to knock. Marcus opened the door, still wearing his maintenance uniform. His expression shifted through surprise wariness, and finally something Victoria couldn't identify. Professor Blackwood? Victoria, please. She swallowed hard. I'm not here as a professor. I'm here as someone who owes you an apology that I don't know how to give. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Come in. The apartment was small, but clean furnished with mismatched pieces that suggested a lifetime of making do with whatever was available. Medical equipment occupied one corner. Books filled every available surface. Mathematics texts mixed with novels and history and poetry. An elderly woman sat in an armchair near the window, watching Victoria with sharp eyes that reminded her uncomfortably of Marcus's steady gaze during their confrontation. Mama, this is Professor Blackwood. I know who she is. The woman's voice carried the weight of someone who had observed the entire competition through screens and social media updates. She's the one who wanted to prove my son was nothing. Victoria felt the words like physical blows. Mrs. Green, Sit down, Professor. It wasn't a request. Victoria sat. I watched everything, Mrs. Green continued. Every moment of that competition. Watched you design problems to break my son. Watched you provide commentary designed to humiliate him. Watched you stand there expecting him to fail because people like us aren't supposed to succeed in your world. Mama, Marcus said quietly. Let me finish. The old woman's eyes never left Victoria's face. I raised my son to believe that character matters more than credentials, that kindness matters more than cleverness, that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals who you really are. Victoria couldn't speak, couldn't defend herself, couldn't do anything but absorb the truth of this woman's assessment. My husband taught mathematics to teenagers in Baltimore for 30 years, made nothing, owned nothing, died with less money than you probably spend on coffee in a month. But at his funeral, former students lined up around the block to tell me how he changed their lives, how he made them believe they could understand things they thought were beyond them, how he saw their potential when nobody else did. Mrs. Green leaned forward in her chair. That's what real teaching is, Professor. Not protecting your ego. not maintaining standards that keep people out. Real teaching is looking at a person and seeing what they could become, then helping them get there. You're right, Victoria's voice cracked. About everything. I've spent my entire career building walls instead of doors, proving my own superiority instead of lifting others up. I don't know when I became this person. I don't even know if I can become someone different. Silence filled the small apartment. Then Mrs. Green did something Victoria didn't expect. She smiled. Well, at least you're honest about it. That's more than most people manage. Marcus sat in the chair beside his mother. Why did you come here, Victoria? It's past midnight. The competition is over. You don't owe me anything. I owe you everything. Victoria met his eyes directly, forcing herself not to look away despite her shame. I owe you an apology that words can't cover. I owe you recognition I tried to deny. I owe you the acknowledgement that you are exactly what Eleanor Chen said. Brilliant. Extraordinary. The most naturally gifted mathematician I've ever seen. I don't need your acknowledgement. I know. That's what makes it matter. Victoria took a deep breath. I came here because I need to understand something. During the competition, after everything I did to you, you defended me. You told the audience that I'd asked a legitimate question. You gave me grace I didn't deserve. Why? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because hatred destroys the person who carries it more than the person it's directed at. Because spending energy on revenge is energy I could spend on mathematics, on my mother, on building something instead of tearing something down. He paused. And because I know something about you that you might have forgotten. What? You love mathematics. Real love, not career love or prestige love. I saw it during your lecture before you noticed me standing there. The way you talked about that proof, the way your eyes lit up when you explained the elegant parts. You weren't performing for your students. You were sharing something beautiful. Victoria felt tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. When had she last cried? She couldn't remember. Somewhere along the way, you lost that, Marcus continued. You started caring more about being right than about understanding truth. You started measuring your worth by credentials instead of contribution. You became the gatekeeper instead of the guide. How do I find my way back? I don't know. That's your journey, not mine. Marcus stood. But I can tell you this. The professor who designed those competition problems wasn't all bad. She was thorough. She was challenging. She was in her own twisted way, trying to maintain standards that she believed mattered. The problem wasn't your dedication to excellence. It was your blindness to where excellence could come from. Victoria stood as well, suddenly aware that she had been sitting in a stranger's home past midnight, receiving life guidance from people who had every reason to slam the door in her face. I should go. I'm sorry for intruding. You didn't intrude, Mrs. Green said. You came looking for something, and I think you found a piece of it. Now you have to decide what to do with that piece. At the door, Marcus stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. The $50,000 is going to cover Mama's treatment for the next year. The PhD admission means I can finally finish my dissertation, continue the work I started 7 years ago. Whatever your intentions were, your competition gave me back my future. I didn't give you anything. You earned it. Maybe. But you created the opportunity, even if you hoped I would fail. A slight smile crossed his face. Sometimes our worst intentions produce results we never imagined. Victoria stepped into the hallway. What happens now between us? That depends on who you decide to be tomorrow. He closed the door, leaving Victoria alone in the dim corridor with questions she couldn't answer and a weight on her chest that felt almost like hope. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting of the university's senior administration. President Harrison arrived expecting damage control. Vice President Morrison arrived expecting strategy sessions on managing the media explosion. Dean Patterson arrived expecting reassurance that the mathematics department wasn't imploding. None of them expected what Victoria actually said. I need to tell you what I did. For the next hour, she laid out everything. The deliberate design of competition problems intended to expose Marcus as a fraud. The psychological manipulation during the challenge. The commentary designed to break his confidence. The marriage joke crafted to humiliate him before cameras broadcasting to 250,000 viewers. I turned an academic competition into a personal vendetta, Victoria said. I tried to destroy a man because he corrected my mathematics and threatened my sense of superiority. I used institutional power to attack someone with none. President Harrison's face had gone pale. Victoria, do you understand what you're telling us? The liability implications alone. I understand. And I understand that Marcus Green has every right to pursue legal action against me and against this university for what I put him through. I'm telling you this because you need to know what happened, and because I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences follow. What exactly are you proposing? Victoria looked around the table at colleagues she had worked with for years. People who had respected her, admired her, treated her as the face of mathematical excellence at Preston University. I'm proposing 3 things. First, an official university apology to Marcus Green for the hostile environment I created during the competition. Second, a scholarship program to identify mathematical talent among university staff and local community members who might otherwise be overlooked. Third, my resignation as department head. Silence crashed through the conference room. Victoria, that's unnecessary, Dean Patterson said. Yes, your handling of the competition was problematic, but your academic record... My academic record is exactly the problem. Victoria's voice hardened. I've spent my career measuring worth by credentials, evaluating potential by pedigree, deciding who deserves recognition based on where they came from instead of what they can do. That philosophy is wrong, and I can't continue leading a department while I'm figuring out how to unlearn it. And if we reject your resignation, then I'll stay. But I'm asking you to accept it, not as punishment for what I did, but as the beginning of making things right. The administration deliberated for 3 hours. Victoria waited in her office, watching students walk across campus below, wondering how many of them she had dismissed without ever seeing their potential. At 4 p.m., President Harrison knocked on her door. We've reached a decision. Tell me. Your resignation as department head is accepted, but we're not accepting your resignation from the faculty. You'll continue as a professor with a reduced administrative load while the university establishes the scholarship program you proposed. Victoria nodded slowly. And Marcus Green? We've already reached out to him with a formal apology and an offer of full-time employment as a visiting researcher while he completes his doctorate. MIT has agreed to fast-track his readmission given the circumstances. He'll be working with Eleanor Chen again, finishing the dissertation he started 7 years ago. That's good. That's exactly right. There's one more thing. Harrison's expression softened. We want you to be involved in designing the scholarship program. Not as an administrator, but as a consultant. Someone who understands both the value of formal education and the blindness it can create. Why me, after everything I did? Because you're the one who saw the problem clearly enough to name it. Most people in your position would have buried their mistakes and moved on. You walked into this office and demanded we hold you accountable. That takes a kind of courage we need more of in this institution. Victoria looked out her window at the campus she had shaped for a decade. The buildings she had walked through with such certainty, believing she understood exactly who deserved to be there and who didn't. I don't know if I can help anyone, she said quietly. I don't know if I can even help myself. None of us know that, Victoria, but we can try. That's all any of us can do. That evening, news of Victoria's resignation exploded across social media. Speculation ran wild about the reasons, the circumstances, the implications for the mathematics department and the university as a whole. Some voices praised her for taking responsibility. Others condemned her for not facing harsher consequences. Academics debated whether resignation was too much or too little, whether she had been genuinely transformed or was simply managing her image. Victoria ignored all of it. Instead, she sat in her apartment with her phone in her hand, staring at a contact she had never saved, but had somehow memorized anyway. After everything that had happened after the resignation and the apology and the scholarship program, one conversation remained unfinished. One relationship hung suspended between destruction and possibility. She typed a message, deleted it, typed again. Marcus, I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness, but I'm trying to become someone different, someone better. Would you be willing to have coffee with me? Not as professor and janitor, not as competition designer and victim, just as two people who love mathematics and somehow ended up in each other's lives. Her finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. Then she pressed it. The reply came at midnight after Victoria had given up hope of receiving one. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., the coffee shop on Harrison Street. I'll bring my dissertation notes. You can tell me what you think. Victoria read the message 3 times, trying to decode its meaning. Was this forgiveness, professional courtesy, something else entirely? She couldn't tell, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Blackwood went to sleep with something other than pride or ambition driving her thoughts. She went to sleep with hope. The coffee shop was small and crowded far from the elegant faculty haunts where Victoria usually conducted her professional meetings. Students hunched over laptops at cramped tables. The barista called out orders that blended into white noise. Marcus was already there when she arrived, spreading handwritten pages across a corner booth that barely accommodated 2 people. His maintenance uniform was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater that made him look like the doctoral student he had once been and would soon be again. You came, he said. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might change your mind overnight. Decide that coffee with the janitor who humiliated you wasn't worth your time after all. Victoria slid into the booth across from him. You didn't humiliate me. You exposed me. There's a difference. Humiliation requires malice. You never showed me anything but patience and grace. The grace wasn't for you. Marcus's voice carried no cruelty, just honesty. It was for me. Carrying anger is exhausting. I learned that a long time ago watching my father deal with people who dismissed him because he taught high school instead of university. What did he do? He loved them anyway. Kept teaching, kept inspiring, kept believing that mathematics could reach anyone who was willing to see it. He died knowing that some of the kids he'd taught went on to do things he never could, and he was proud of them instead of envious. Victoria thought about her own father, a federal judge who measured worth by achievement status, by position, love by success. She had inherited his worldview without ever questioning whether it was true. Your dissertation notes, she said, changing the subject because the other one cut too deep. You said you'd show me. Marcus pushed the pages toward her. Handwritten equations covered every inch, dense with insight and originality. Victoria recognized the framework from Eleanor Chen's description. Classical analysis meeting modern quantum mechanics. Old techniques applied to new problems in ways that nobody had considered. This is brilliant, she said after 15 minutes of silent reading. This is genuinely originally brilliant. Thank you. How much do you have left to do? 6 months maybe, if I can work full-time on it without 3 jobs pulling me in different directions. Marcus smiled slightly. Thanks to your competition, that's actually possible now. Thanks to your brilliance, I just provided the stage. A stage you designed as a trap. Yes. Victoria met his eyes. A trap that you turned into a triumph. I've been thinking about that a lot. About how intentions and outcomes don't always align. About how trying to destroy someone can sometimes be the thing that finally lets them shine. Is that what you're taking from this experience? That your cruelty had a silver lining? The question was sharper than anything Marcus had said to her before. Victoria felt its edge and didn't flinch. No, I'm taking from this that I was wrong about almost everything I believed. About intelligence. about education, about who deserves recognition and how we should measure worth. Your success didn't justify my cruelty. It exposed how unnecessary that cruelty was in the first place. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the same intensity he had once applied to her blackboard equations. Why do you care what I think of you? The question caught Victoria off guard. What do you mean? You've apologized. You've resigned. You've established a scholarship program. You've done everything society expects from someone seeking redemption. Why are you sitting here in a coffee shop you would never normally enter, asking for my opinion on your transformation? Victoria struggled to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because your opinion is the only one that matters to me right now. Not because you're the person I wronged, although you are. Not because you're going to be a famous mathematician someday, although you probably will be. Because you see things clearly. You look at truth directly instead of through layers of ego and self-protection. And I need someone who can see me clearly to tell me if I'm actually changing or just performing change. I can't tell you that. Why not? Because change isn't a destination. It's a direction. You might be pointed the right way today and turn around tomorrow. You might struggle for years and never fully become the person you want to be. I can't predict your future any more than I could predict solving your dissertation problem in 75 minutes. Then what can you tell me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I can tell you that you're asking the right questions, that you showed up here without your credentials or your position to hide behind, that you looked at my dissertation notes with genuine curiosity instead of professional evaluation. He paused. I can tell you that my mother thinks you're worth giving a second chance, and her judgment about people is better than mine. What do you think? I think you're the most complicated person I've ever met. Brilliant and blind, cruel and capable of kindness. So committed to being right that you forgot what truth actually means. Marcus leaned forward. I think you could become someone extraordinary if you let go of the person you thought you were supposed to be. And I think the fact that you're sitting here asking these questions means you've already started. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Not resolution exactly. Not forgiveness. Something more fragile and more precious. The beginning of something she couldn't name. What happens now? She asked. Now we finish our coffee. Then I go back to my dissertation, and you go back to whatever it is professors do when they're not running departments. And maybe if we're both willing, we keep talking, keep challenging each other, keep figuring out what mathematics and life and everything else actually mean. As colleagues, as whatever we become. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since their confrontation began, Victoria saw genuine warmth in his eyes. Life has a way of surprising us with connections we never expected. You designed a competition to destroy me, and ended up giving me back my future. Maybe I was put in your life to destroy some walls you'd built around yourself. Maybe we're supposed to help each other become whoever we're meant to be. That's very philosophical for a mathematician. My father taught me that mathematics isn't separate from life. It's the language life uses to describe itself. Every equation tells a story. Every proof reveals a truth. Every problem solved opens doors to problems we didn't know existed. Victoria looked at the man across from her. The janitor who had corrected her mathematics. The genius who had refused to let circumstances define his worth. The son who had sacrificed everything for love. Will you help me? She asked. With the scholarship program, with identifying students who might be overlooked, with understanding what I've been missing all these years. On one condition. What? Stop calling yourself a professor in your head. Stop thinking of me as a janitor or a doctoral student or anything else with a label attached. When we work together, we're just two people who love mathematics trying to share that love with others. Victoria extended her hand across the table. Deal. Marcus shook it. And somewhere in that handshake, in that coffee shop, in that moment between two people who should have been enemies but were choosing something different. A new story began. 6 months passed faster than either of them expected. Victoria watched from the back of the MIT auditorium as Marcus defended his dissertation before a panel of the world's most accomplished mathematicians. His presentation flowed with the same elegant clarity she had witnessed during the competition. Each concept building naturally on the last, each proof revealing not just mathematical truth, but the deeper beauty hiding beneath the symbols. Eleanor Chen sat at the center of the panel, her eyes bright with pride and something that looked like vindication. 7 years after her most promising student had walked away from everything, he had returned to finish what he started. "Dr. Green," Eleanor said when the presentation concluded, "your work on classical quantum correspondences represents a genuine advance in mathematical physics. The connections you've established between 19th-century variational methods and modern quantum field theory open entirely new avenues for research." Marcus nodded, his expression calm, but his hands betraying the smallest tremor. "However," Eleanor continued, "I have one final question." The auditorium fell silent. "Why did you come back?" The question hung in the air. It wasn't part of any standard dissertation defense. It was personal probing designed to reach beyond academic achievement to something deeper. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I realized that walking away from mathematics didn't make me a better son. It just made me an incomplete mathematician who was also trying to be a good son." He paused. "My mother needed care. She still does. But she also needed me to be whole. And I wasn't whole without this." He gestured at the boards covered with equations. "Mathematics isn't separate from love. It's one of the ways I express love. For patterns, for truth, for the beautiful structure underlying reality. Denying that part of myself didn't help anyone. Coming back to it, finishing what I started, that's how I honor everything I believe in." Eleanor's voice caught. "The panel unanimously recommends approval of Dr. Marcus Green's dissertation with highest distinction." Applause erupted through the auditorium. Victoria clapped until her hands hurt, watching the man she had once tried to destroy receive the recognition he had earned through brilliance and sacrifice and stubborn refusal to let circumstances define his worth. After the ceremony, Marcus found her in the hallway outside. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" He smiled. "I thought you might have better things to do than watch a former janitor become a doctor. There's nothing better than watching someone I care about achieve what they deserve." Victoria met his eyes directly. "Besides, I helped design the scholarship program that's going to find other people like you. Watching you succeed reminds me why that work matters." "How's it going?" "The program. 12 candidates in the first cohort. 3 from custodial staff, 2 from food services, 4 from the local community college, 3 from high schools in underserved neighborhoods. All of them brilliant in ways I would have missed a year ago." "Would have missed. I'm learning to see differently. It's not easy. I still catch myself making assumptions based on appearance or background. But I catch myself now. That's the difference." Marcus studied her face. "You look different." "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you've set something down that you were carrying for a long time." Victoria thought about that. About the credentials she had accumulated like armor. About the certainty she had worn like a shield. About the walls she had built between herself and anyone who might challenge her sense of superiority. "I resigned from more than the department head position," she said quietly. "I resigned from who I thought I had to be. I'm still figuring out who I actually am." "That sounds terrifying." "It is." She smiled slightly. "But it's also the most honest I've felt in 20 years. They walked out of the building into spring sunshine that seemed almost aggressively cheerful, given the weight of the conversation. Students moved across the MIT campus in clusters, carrying textbooks and laptops and dreams they were too young to doubt. "Your mother," Victoria said. "How is she?" "Better than the doctors expected. The new treatment is working. She might have years instead of months." Marcus's voice carried wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. She wants to meet you properly, not as the professor who tried to destroy her son, but as the woman who helped him find his way back. I didn't help you find anything. You did that yourself. Victoria. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. You created the competition that gave me $50,000 for my mother's treatment. You created the scholarship program that's going to find talent like mine in places nobody else looks. You resigned your position because you recognized that you'd become something you didn't want to be. Those were consequences of my cruelty, not. Those were choices you made after your cruelty was exposed. Bad intentions led to a crisis. But your response to that crisis was transformation. That's not something I did. That's something you did. Victoria felt tears threatening again. She had cried more in the past 6 months than in the previous 20 years combined. Something about Marcus made her defenses useless. Why do you keep defending me? After everything. Because I've watched you change, not perform change, actually change. The Victoria Blackwood who screamed at me in that lecture hall couldn't have sat through my dissertation defense with genuine pride in my success. That Victoria would have found ways to diminish it to claim partial credit to remind everyone that she was still the superior mathematician. I'm not sure I am anymore. The superior mathematician, I mean. You're not. Marcus said it without cruelty, just honesty. You're very good, maybe great. Maybe. But you were never as good as you thought you were, and your need to believe otherwise was destroying you. That's harsh. It's true. And you can handle truth now. That's the difference. They resumed walking, moving toward the campus center, where a reception awaited to celebrate Marcus's achievement. Victoria thought about his words, turning them over like mathematical proofs, examining them for flaws, and finding none. What are you going to do now? She asked. With your doctorate? Eleanor wants me to stay at MIT as a research fellow. Princeton and Stanford made offers too. Harvard sent a very awkward letter trying to pretend they hadn't spent months attacking me in academic publications. Jonathan's department. Yes. Marcus glanced at her. Have you talked to him? He called once about 2 months after the competition. Wanted to discuss how we might rehabilitate our professional partnership. I hung up before he finished the sentence. No regrets. About Jonathan, none. He showed me exactly who he was during the competition. Someone who cared about credentials and connections more than truth or kindness. I was the same way for years. Seeing it in him helped me recognize it in myself. That's very evolved of you. I've had a good teacher. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who? You. Watching how you handle adversity. How you respond to cruelty with grace. How you stay focused on what matters instead of getting distracted by ego. Victoria shook her head. I spent my career teaching mathematics and learning nothing about how to be a decent human being. 6 months of knowing you has taught me more about character than 36 years of academic achievement. That's a lot of pressure to put on a janitor. Former janitor. You're Dr. Green now. I'm still the same person. The degree doesn't change what's inside. Marcus smiled. That's the whole point, isn't it? The lesson we've both been learning. Credentials don't determine worth. Character does. Contribution does. How we treat people when we have power over them does. They reached the reception hall. Through the windows, Victoria could see mathematicians and academics gathering to celebrate Marcus's achievement. Eleanor Chen stood near the entrance, waiting to escort her protege into the culmination of everything he had worked for. Before we go in, Victoria said, I need to ask you something. Anything. That day in my lecture hall, when you corrected my mathematics, why didn't you just let it go? You knew what would happen. You knew I would react badly. Why did you say anything? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because I couldn't not say it. The error was there staring at me, and I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. He paused. And because I was tired of being invisible. 5 years of being looked through, stepped around, treated like furniture. 5 years of hiding what I knew, because people like me weren't supposed to know things like that. You risked everything. I risked a job I hated for a chance to be seen as a whole person. That's not everything. That's nothing compared to what I gained. What did you gain? This. Marcus gestured at the reception hall at the campus, at everything around them. A path back to mathematics. A platform to prove that talent doesn't follow predictable patterns. A chance to show everyone who ever dismissed someone based on their uniform that they might be missing something extraordinary. His eyes found hers. And I met you. The most complicated, frustrating, ultimately transformative person I've ever known. Victoria's breath caught. Transformative. You forced me to fight for recognition instead of accepting invisibility. You created a competition that gave me the resources to save my mother and restart my career. You changed because I challenged you, and watching you change taught me that people can genuinely grow when they're willing to face their failures. That's a lot to attribute to a woman who screamed at you in front of 200 students. Truth is strange that way. Sometimes the worst moments become the doorways to the best ones. Eleanor appeared at the entrance, waving them inside. Marcus, Victoria, everyone's waiting. They moved toward the reception, toward the celebration of everything Marcus had achieved and everything their unlikely connection had made possible. At the entrance, Marcus paused. Victoria. Yes? About that marriage proposal, the one you made during the competition. Victoria felt her face flush. The joke she had made to humiliate him had haunted her for 6 months, a constant reminder of her cruelty played back in social media clips and news coverage. I was hoping we could both forget about that. I don't want to forget it. Marcus's voice was serious. I want to replace it. Replace it how? Let me take you to dinner. Not as professor and former janitor. Not as competition designer and victim. Not as mentor and mentee in some scholarship program. As two people who somehow found each other through the worst possible circumstances and discovered something worth exploring. Victoria stared at him. Are you asking me on a date? I'm asking you to give us a chance to find out what we might be without all the baggage we've been carrying. You've spent 6 months becoming someone new. So have I. Maybe the new versions of us have something to offer each other that the old versions never could. You should hate me. I should, but I don't. And I've learned to trust my instincts about mathematics and about people. Victoria thought about everything that had happened since that day in the lecture hall. The competition, the revelations, the resignation, the scholarship program. The slow, painful work of dismantling the person she had constructed and discovering who might be underneath. Marcus Green had been the catalyst for all of it. The spark that ignited her transformation. The mirror that showed her what she had become. And somewhere in the past 6 months, he had become something else too. Something she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she deserved. Dinner, she said finally. Tomorrow night. There's a restaurant near campus that I've always been too intimidated to try alone. Why intimidated? Because it's the kind of place where couples go, where people share meals and conversations and build connections that matter. I've spent my whole adult life avoiding those places, avoiding those connections, avoiding anything that might make me vulnerable. And now I'm willing to try being vulnerable. With you. If you're willing to be patient with someone who's still learning how to be human. Marcus smiled, and Victoria felt something warm spread through her chest. Not certainty. Not the cold confidence she had carried for so long. Something softer and more precious. Hope. I've spent 7 years caring for my dying mother while working 3 jobs and studying mathematics in stolen moments. Patience is something I understand. Then it's a date. It's a date. They entered the reception together, and for the first time since she had walked into that lecture hall 6 months ago, Victoria Blackwood felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 1 year later, the story that had captivated the mathematical world continued to evolve in ways nobody had predicted. Marcus Green's research on classical quantum correspondences had been published to international acclaim. His papers were being cited by physicists and mathematicians around the world, opening new avenues of investigation that promised to reshape understanding of fundamental reality. But that wasn't the story that people remembered. They remembered the janitor who had corrected a professor's mathematics, the competition designed to destroy him that had instead revealed his brilliance, the arrogant academic who had been transformed by her own cruelty into someone capable of genuine humility and growth. The Blackwood Green Scholarship had identified 37 overlooked mathematical talents in its first year. A cafeteria worker from Preston University, who turned out to be a gifted topologist. A security guard from MIT whose work on number theory earned her immediate admission to a doctoral program. A high school dropout from Baltimore who had taught himself advanced calculus and was now working with some of the finest mathematicians in the world. Each success story added to the legend. Each transformed life proved that the competition's most important outcome wasn't the mathematics. It was the recognition that brilliance didn't follow the patterns that institutions expected. Victoria stood at the podium of the Blackwood Green Foundation's first annual gala, looking out at an audience that included mathematicians, educators, business leaders, and scholarship recipients whose lives had been changed by an idea born from failure and transformed through redemption. 1 year ago, she said, I designed a competition to destroy a man I considered beneath me. I wanted to prove that formal education was the only path to mathematical excellence. I wanted to protect the walls I had built around achievement, ensuring that only people who looked like me and thought like me could be recognized as worthy. She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. I was wrong. About everything. And being wrong nearly destroyed me. Marcus sat in the front row, his mother beside him. Mrs. Green's health had stabilized beyond all expectations. The doctors called it a miracle. Marcus called it stubbornness. Victoria called it exactly what the universe owed a woman who had raised a son capable of grace under fire. But being wrong also saved me, because in trying to destroy Marcus Green, I exposed myself. I revealed the ugliness I had been hiding beneath credentials and accomplishments, and that exposure forced me to confront who I had become. Victoria's voice caught. She had practiced this speech 100 times, but delivering it in front of the man who had changed everything was harder than she had anticipated. Marcus Green didn't just solve my doctoral dissertation problem in 75 minutes. He solved a problem I didn't know I had. The problem of a woman so committed to being right that she had forgotten what truth actually meant. The problem of an educator so focused on maintaining standards that she had stopped actually educating. The problem of a human being so afraid of vulnerability that she had built walls around her heart and called them achievements. She looked directly at Marcus. I asked you once why you corrected my mathematics that day. Why you risked everything to point out an error I would have discovered eventually anyway. You said it was because you couldn't not say it. Because the truth was there, and pretending otherwise was impossible for you. Victoria smiled through the tears she no longer tried to hide. I understand that now. Because the truth of what you taught me is there too impossible to ignore. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. Brilliance doesn't require a pedigree. The people we overlook might be exactly the people we need. The applause that followed was different from any Victoria had received during her years as an academic star. It wasn't admiration for her achievements. It was recognition of her honesty, acknowledgement of her willingness to stand before the world and admit that she had been wrong about the things that mattered most. After the gala, Marcus found her on the terrace overlooking the city lights. The autumn air carried the smell of fallen leaves and possibility. That was brave, he said. That was necessary. Those people needed to hear why this foundation exists. They needed to understand that it came from failure, not success. Most foundations try to hide their founders' failures. Most foundations are built on ego. This one is built on truth. Victoria turned to face him. Your truth. The truth you forced me to see by refusing to be invisible. Marcus leaned against the railing beside her. In the years since his dissertation defense, he had grown into his role as one of mathematics' rising stars, with the same quiet dignity that had characterized every step of his journey. "I've been thinking about that question you asked me," he said, "back at MIT, about what I gained from correcting your mathematics that day. You already answered that. I gave you a list of practical outcomes, career opportunities, recognition, platform." He paused. "But there was something else I didn't mention because I wasn't ready to admit it." "What?" "You." Victoria's breath caught. "I gained you. This complicated, infuriating, ultimately transformative person who challenged everything I thought I knew about academic elitism and turned out to be someone capable of genuine change. I was terrible to you. You were, and then you weren't. That's what makes you interesting." Marcus turned to look at her directly. "Most people who fail as spectacularly as you did would spend the rest of their lives defending their choices. You spent the rest of the year dismantling them. I had good motivation." "What motivation?" Victoria hesitated. Some truths were harder to speak than others, even for someone who had spent a year learning to be honest. "You," she said finally, "you were my motivation. Watching how you responded to cruelty with grace. Watching how you focused on mathematics and your mother instead of revenge. Watching how you built something beautiful out of circumstances that would have broken most people. I'm not that noble. You're exactly that noble. And I wanted to be worthy of knowing you, not as the professor who tried to destroy you, but as someone you might actually want in your life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "When you made that marriage proposal during the competition, you meant it as mockery. A joke designed to humiliate me in front of 250,000 viewers. I know, I'm sorry. I've apologized 100 times. I'm not asking for another apology." Marcus reached into his pocket. "I'm asking you to let me replace that mockery with something real." He pulled out a small box. Victoria's heart stopped. "Marcus, I know this is fast. I know we've only been dating for a year. I know that our relationship started with you screaming at me in a lecture hall and designing a competition to destroy me." He opened the box. A simple ring caught the terrace lights, elegant and understated. Nothing like the ostentatious jewelry Victoria had once associated with success. "But I also know that you've spent the past year becoming someone I admire, someone I respect, someone I want to build a life with." Marcus's voice was steady, the same calm certainty that had carried him through every challenge he had faced. "Victoria Blackwood, you once joked that you would marry whoever solved your equation. I solved your equation, but more importantly, you solved mine." What equation was that? The one I'd been working on for years without knowing it. How do you find someone worth building a future with? How do you recognize a partner who will challenge you to grow instead of letting you stay comfortable? How do you trust again after watching the world dismiss you as worthless? He held out the ring. "The answer was you. It was always you from the moment you screamed at me in that lecture hall. I just didn't know it yet." Victoria stared at the ring, at the man holding it, at everything that had led them to this moment on a terrace overlooking city lights. She thought about the professor she had been. Arrogant, blind, certain of her own superiority. That Victoria would have laughed at the idea of marrying a janitor, would have dismissed the very possibility as beneath her consideration. That Victoria was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned painfully and publicly that worth couldn't be measured by credentials. That intelligence didn't follow predictable patterns. That the people we underestimate might be exactly the people who can save us from ourselves. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes." Stronger now, clearer. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you. Yes, I want to spend the rest of my years learning from someone who sees truth more clearly than I ever did." Marcus slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been designed for her from the beginning. "You know," he said, pulling her close, "when this story gets told, people are going to focus on the competition. The janitor who solved the professor's equation, the arrogant academic brought low by her own cruelty. Let them focus on whatever they want. But that's not the real story. What's the real story? Marcus kissed her forehead gentle and sure. Two people who found each other through the worst possible circumstances and discovered that the thing they were both looking for was standing right in front of them, hidden behind uniforms and credentials and walls built from fear. But they're waiting to be seen if they were willing to look. Victoria rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger and the lightness of a future she had never imagined. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Marcus held her closer. "And I'm glad you made that ridiculous marriage proposal. Because now I get to spend the rest of my life reminding you that you promised." Victoria laughed, the sound surprising her with its freedom. Below them, the city lights sparkled like equations waiting to be solved. Above them, stars traced patterns that mathematicians had studied for millennia. And between them, something new had been created. Not from success or achievement, or the credentials that Victoria had once worshipped. From failure. From transformation. From the willingness to see truth clearly and change accordingly. The janitor and the professor. The genius and the gatekeeper. Two people who had found each other through conflict and discovered that the most beautiful equations are sometimes found in the human heart. Intelligence doesn't wear a uniform. Brilliance doesn't require a pedigree. Love doesn't follow the patterns we expect. And sometimes the person you underestimate becomes the person who teaches you everything worth knowing.